I'm very happy to introduce our keynote speaker, New Jersey Senator Robert Menendez. Senator Robert Menendez is the son of Cuban immigrants, and the seeds for his political career were planted in high school when a teacher helped him overcome his fear of public speaking. He has a long history of fighting for diversity. At the age of 19, while in college, he won a seat on the Union City Board of Education, where he fought to level the playing field for students in his hometown of Union City, New Jersey. In 1990, while serving in the New Jersey State Legislature, he authored and passed New Jersey's landmark bias crimes law, which was among the first in the country to make crimes committed on the basis of race, religion, ethnicity, or sexual orientation an aggravated offense with stiffer penalties. That law has served as a national model for state and federal anti-hate laws across the US. Today, he's working on a variety of initiatives that includes working to pass the Improving Corporate Governance Through Diversity Act of 2021, which he will tell us more about today. After he speaks, he and I will have a short Q&A. Senator Menendez, thank you so much for joining the Alumni Society today. I'll let you take it from here.
Bueno, gracias, Pedro. Buen día. Good morning, everyone. It's my pleasure to speak with the Alumni Society today. I'm so impressed by this organization, its mission, and its membership. And I don't have to tell you, particularly this group, that historically, Latinos and other minorities in business have encountered obstacles on the way up the corporate ladder, of which breaking into the old professional networking circles of the past is a big one. Even as graduates of our country's top universities and rising stars in business, I'm sure that there have been times that you felt like outsiders trying to make your way in a world built for and by insiders. So I want to commend Pedro Guerrero and Ricardo Ansaldúa for founding the Alumni Society and establishing a powerful network of your own. You've built a valuable forum for Hispanic graduates of our nation's finest universities to connect, to mentor, and share opportunities with each other. And in the business world, those connections can make all the difference. Now, I've devoted my life to a very different field, the field of public service and policymaking, but I know the feeling of being an outsider quite well. When I was first elected to Congress in 1992, few Latinos held federal office. And not so long ago, I was the lone Latino in the United States Senate. Now we've made great progress over the years. Today we have 6 Latino senators in the most diverse Congress in history. I've seen firsthand how electing a Congress that looks like the American people better serves the needs and aspirations of the American people. Yet in recent years, I've increasingly wondered why corporate America has yet to reflect the diversity of the nation. So about a decade ago, I started and directed my staff to begin periodically surveying top American companies about their diversity in the Fortune 100. Our findings suggest we have still a very long way to go. Take a peek inside America's top boardrooms and executive suites, and what you'll see is overwhelmingly male and overwhelmingly pale. What will it take to build an inclusive economy with those at the top look more like the bottom and the middle? Well, like many of you, I'm a son of immigrants. My parents came here from Cuba in search of freedom. And when they arrived in America, they had no jobs, no connections, no housing, and not a cent in their pockets. And yet somehow, this extraordinary country made it possible for their son to go from a tenement in Union City to the floor of the United States Senate. That is the American dream. This idea that anyone can make it in America is core to our national identity. Yet recent studies suggest that economic mobility in the United States is falling far behind other industrialized nations. Today, children from low-income families, and especially children of color, are less likely to make it into the middle class or beyond. Meanwhile, women and minorities still earn less than their white male counterparts. We pride ourselves on being a country that rewards hard work, that offers opportunity to all, that treats diversity as a strength. So the question is, how do we live up to those ideals? Certainly, we need government policies that combat poverty, protect against discrimination, promote equity, support upward mobility. But the private sector has a critical role to play, not just a role, I would say an interest. Think about the trends that will shape our economy in the coming decades. First is the growing diversity of the American people. According to census data, more than half of American minors already identify as a racial or ethnic minority. Diversity is very much our destiny. The companies that incorporate women and minority voices throughout their ranks will be better positioned to reach an increasingly diverse pool of consumers and leverage their economic might. The second trend is the way innovation has transformed our economy. Today's greatest economic opportunities lie in fields that traditionally lag behind in minority representation, like digital technology, professional services, international commerce, and STEM fields. How can we as a nation thrive if the fastest growing portion of our population is locked out of our fastest growing opportunities? A key measure of whether we are keeping the promise of America alive is whether women and people of color are succeeding at every level of our economy. However, the data from my most recent survey of Fortune 100 companies completed in 2017 suggests we have a long way to go. As you well know, Fortune 100 firms command tremendous assets and influence in our country and in our economy. In 2017 alone, their profits averaged $27 billion. Now, many of the CEOs are household names. Others are known around the world as respected industry leaders. One thing, however, has stood true for the longest time, and that is that they are mostly white men. Make no mistake, there has been some progress in recent years. However, that progress is moving at a snail's pace, especially when you consider how many women and people of color are graduating from college. For example, back in 2014, just over 50% of Fortune 100 companies reported having one or two women executives. By 2017, the same number of companies reported having 3 to 5 women on their executive teams. Yet women of color have not shared in this progress. Indeed, not a single company reported having more than 2 women of color on their boards. Let me repeat that. Not a single Fortune 100 respondent reported having more than 2 women of color on their boards. I can't believe that in the 21st century. The data has also laid bare the disparities for Latinos. In 2017, Hispanics represented just 4.9% of all board members among my Fortune 100 sample. 6 out of 10 companies had no Hispanic men serving on their boards at all, and more than 8 in 10 had 0 Latina board members. 0. Unfortunately, my findings are consistent with much of the research that is out there on corporate diversity. For example, KPMG and the Latino Corporate Directors Association regularly tracks Latino representation on corporate boards. In 2020, they found the Latinos held just 3% of Fortune 100 corporate director positions. And get this, 73% of the Fortune 1000 did not have a single Latino on their boardrooms. Let me say that again. More than 700 of the companies listed on the Fortune 1000 did not have a single Latino on their corporate boards. That's unacceptable and has to be called out. We have to say out loud that corporate America has a diversity problem and that corporate America has a responsibility to fix it. How often do we see these companies boast of their commitment to racial equity and justice on social media? Yet too many of them don't back up their words with action. They do the talk, but they certainly don't do the walk. In my survey of Fortune 100 firms, each pointed to diversity as a core value. That's good. But 9 out of 10 even said they discussed diversity when engaging executive search firms to fill board openings and senior management roles. So how can we explain then this disconnect between corporate America's aspirations for diversity and their actual behavior? One reason may be that companies aren't holding themselves accountable. As men and women in business, you know that companies live or die by balance sheets. Yet when it comes to diversity, most lack measurable targets. Let me be clear. This is not about fulfilling quotas. This is about getting the data you need to hold yourself accountable. 6 in 10 companies had no numeric targets for improving diversity at the executive level, and 9 of 10 had set no goal for minority representation on the board. It's time for America's corporate leaders to recognize that improving diversity is not just an act of benevolence. It is the smart thing to do for your bottom line. This is about your ability to compete in a country where nearly 20% of the population is already Hispanic, and by 2016, 1 in 3 will be. This is about catering to a fast-growing Latino consumer base that commands nearly $1.5 trillion in purchasing power. This is about succeeding with a Latino population that is collectively a decade younger than the rest of America and is more brand loyal than any other racial and ethnic group. Indeed, if I had the largest growing minority population younger by a decade with $1.5 trillion more brand loyal as a company, I'd like to be on them like white on rice for my bottom line, not to do the right thing. Indeed, we Latinos invest millions of dollars in companies that do not invest in us. Even as highly regarded studies like those from McKinsey and Company find that greater diversity on executive teams leads to greater profitability. Just imagine the untapped profit potential for companies who have yet to incorporate Latino voices, experiences, and wisdom into their leadership ranks. Of course, hiring is just one metric for diversity. Procuring goods and services from minority-owned firms is one of the most impactful ways corporations can spread their gains more equitably through our society. Think about it. For women-owned and minority-owned enterprises, winning a contract with a Fortune 100 company is game-changing. It means more revenue, more hiring, and more relationships to parlay into future opportunities. Nearly all of the Fortune 100 firms we surveyed reported having a manager or senior position devoted to diversity in procurement. And yet, half of the respondents admitted they don't even track the diversity of their suppliers. Tell me, what good is a position devoted to diversifying supply chains if you don't even track the data? Of those who track it, companies reported about 8.3% of their procurement budgets going into small women and minority-owned enterprises, or about $1.6 billion in a fiscal year. That may seem like a lot of money until, of course, you put it in perspective. The same companies spent 90% of their procurement budgets, or nearly $20 billion, on non-minority or women-owned firms. So changing the face of corporate America will demand more than wishful thinking. If we want to see more Latinos claim the mantle of CEO, more Black-owned firms win contracts with the Fortune 100, more women of color in our boardrooms, we need proven strategies to get there. Those strategies may include improving mentorship for people of color, setting clear goals for minority supplier spending, ensuring chief diversity officers report directly to CEOs. And those are just some. But we also need policies that push our most powerful corporations to harness the talent of all Americans. So as a senior member of the Senate Banking Committee, I believe one way we can promote greater inclusivity is by letting investors know which companies are leading the way on diversity and which ones are falling behind. Right now, the Securities and Exchange Commission has a diversity rule that requires public companies to disclose how much they consider diversity when hiring for their boards. Unfortunately, the rule is is weak and it's ineffectual. Way too much is left up to interpretation. Indeed, there's not even a clear definition of what diversity is. That's why earlier this year, I reintroduced the Improving Corporate Governance Through Diversity Act in the Senate, along with my colleague, Congressman Guerrero, in the House. This common sense bill would require public companies to disclose the racial, gender, ethnic makeup, and veteran status of corporate boards and senior management to the SEC. American investors need to know, and increasingly want to know, which companies are not just talking the talk, but walking the walk when it comes to diversity. This legislation would also give you, the future business leaders of America, greater insight into which companies are truly interested in attracting your talent or procuring your services. Now, look, I've been around long enough to know that no single piece of legislation can solve an entire problem. But I do hope this bill is a catalyst that helps create a more representative and more prosperous corporate ecosystem. Sometime this century, the United States will become a majority-minority country. But we cannot succeed if a majority of our population is locked out of our country's greatest economic opportunities. I truly believe that companies that build pipelines of diverse talent today will write the biggest success stories of tomorrow. And all of you, as members of the Alumni Society, have a big role to play in writing those stories. As graduates of our finest universities and talented Latino leaders in business, you must embrace your role as a change maker. You have the power to show corporate America that diversity is just as much about competitiveness as it is about social justice. You have the power to help diversify supply chains and unleash new wealth in communities so often left behind. You have the power to encourage your companies to invest in us in the same deliberate and tangible way our Latino community invests in them. And finally, you have the power to be mentors. Each of you knows what it feels like to have that outsider status in an insider world. And chances are, at some point in your career, there's been someone who helped you walk through a door of opportunity you once thought was closed to you. You can be that person for someone else. Those of us blessed to live the American dream have to do our part to keep it alive for future generations, which will be more racially and ethnically diverse than ever before. So let me thank you again, the Alumni Society, not just for the opportunity to speak with you today, but for all you're doing to unleash the talent, genius, and untapped potential of our Latino community. Muchísimas gracias.
Wow, that was incredible. Thank you so much, Senator, for sharing your insights with us and your leadership on this important initiative. I'd love for you to speak about what motivated you personally to get involved with the Improving Corporate Governance Through Diversity Act of 2021.
Well, Pedro, you know, in my early part of my career, I was a mayor in a city in New Jersey, and a long-standing newspaper that was well established was having a real challenge because in terms of their sales, because the population had changed dramatically, had become more Cuban, more Latino, and the publishers called me over and said, "Can you help us, because we're not doing very well and we're struggling to keep the paper alive?" And so I went over and listened to what they had to say. And I said, how do you sell your product, your advertising? Well, we call up. I said, "Are your callers bilingual?" No. I said, "And I read your paper every day." I said, "And I have to be honest with you, I read it as the mayor, but in terms of my interest as a Latino, you write nothing about our community. And by the way, who's on your corporate board?" Anyhow, needless to say that they went about it the wrong way. And when I suggested them the changes they need to make, they never did. And the result was they ultimately, a long-standing paper that probably was nearly a century old, closed. That's just one of many examples. Chevrolet learned it too when they tried to sell the Chevy Nova in Latin America. I don't care how good your marketing is. It's a simple language issue, but there are many different dimensions to this. So I've been noticing throughout my governmental career that even though we have tremendous economic potential, and this is not just about doing good, it's about doing right, doing good on the bottom line, and doing right by your company, that in fact, when we don't have companies creating the products that are important, for example, for the payday lender, the check cashing place, and the pawnbroker being a thing of the past, financial institutions, which I challenged the large, biggest banks that came before the banking committee to do that. When we don't have people in the corporate boardroom and senior executive management that can give insights onto the tremendous opportunities for the bottom line and greater market share, then we ultimately suffer as well as a community, because we don't get the benefits of those investments in our communities that can unlock economic potential, jobs, and greater growth.
Right. Well, thank you. And this is very much a common sense, but it's no secret that the Senate is divided among party lines. How much support do you see across the aisle, and do you see a path for it to become law?
Well, I certainly hope so. This should be a bipartisan bill. I'm actually talking to one or two of my Republican colleagues in the Senate because, for all of my colleagues who speak about transparency and information, remember that my legislation does not mandate diversity, but it gives us a universal window on what diversity is and isn't taking place. And when we have transparency, when light shines, it is the greatest disinfectant to cure an issue. And so that's what I'm hoping that we can do. So, I'm speaking to Senator Tim Scott. He's interested in diversity issues. He comes from it from a different point of view than I, but I think we can both agree that information, especially to shareholders today, is incredibly important in making decisions on investment, and it's incredibly important to all of us in our society. So I hope we will get there, and we're working in a bicameral process, which is always important. We obviously need both sides of the Capitol to get this to the president's desk.
What reception have you got for the bill from the CEOs and directors that engage with your office? Have you been surprised by the feedback?
I have met with many. I sit on the Senate Finance Committee, which deals with all tax and trade policy, as well as the Banking Committee. So I get a lot of access to CEOs. And one of the things that I did in my corporate diversity survey is it's interesting to see how often when they called me to say we're going to submit the survey, I was a little surprised at how poorly we were doing, which is one of the purposes of such a survey. But I am very happy to see that the American Chamber of Commerce, the Financial Services Forum, which is an organization comprised of the largest U.S. banks, and others have endorsed my legislation and offered their support in getting it passed in the Senate. And that in and of itself is tremendous messaging to my colleagues that corporate leaders are saying, yeah, we believe this is important and we're willing to do it as well.
Right. Well, I like what you say about embracing your role as a change maker. How can executives and companies attending today do that and begin to put the ethos of this bill into actionable practice? And what steps can they intentionally take so that once the bill becomes law, it adheres in a way that drives corporate success versus tokenism?
Well, that's a great question. And first of all, as I have said to CEOs, this starts at the top.
Yeah.
If I, at the very top of the organizational chart, do not give it importance, then those who are underneath my leadership will not also share that importance. If I do not make it a measurement of success and reward, whether it be by bonuses or promotion and whatnot, then it will not happen. So it starts with a commitment at the top, executives who set tangible and deliverable targets and have very specific and data-driven strategic plans to achieve diversity goals will have the greatest success. So those are some items I would say. And listen, there isn't a company that doesn't focus greatly on inputs and outputs. Well, those type of measurements need to also be modeled for the purposes of creating diversity in your firm. And I would encourage corporations and its leaders to use the same passion, resources, and commitment to pursue equitable hiring and promotions at the executive board levels and to measure it. Yeah. And finally, having some rigorous data analysis and targets and metrics to judge whether you're really making, because if we don't judge whether we are actually doing what we think we are doing and having the success we may believe we are having, then we obviously fail. So it's the same thing as the quarterly profit report. You want to know how well you're doing.
Right. So share your vision of the outcome of this bill. How do you believe the impact will be best felt 10 years from now?
Well, I'd like the bill, when it becomes law, to be the start of a momentous transformation towards transparency and accountability in hiring throughout the nation. And when we have that information, we are collectively able to make the case. Leaders in our communities, civic associations, investor groups, pension funds, state funds that represent large segments of our community can say, hey, you're an interesting company, but you have no diversity. ultimately being pursued by your company. I want a company that does well, but I also want a company that is diverse. And I believe they're not mutually exclusive. So I think that that type of movement that can be created. And then, of course, we have to demand it. One of the things I've talked to is state legislators throughout the country who have no idea how their state's pension funds are being used.
Wow.
It could be a tremendous catalyst to create change. Of course, they need to have the information, and they can urge their pension funds to be looking at the type of information that my legislation would make a reality.
Well, I think we have time for one more quick question. I love what you said about mentorship. Are there any other parting words or advice for the current corporate directors and future board members sitting before you today?
Well, I always have believed in my own role as a mayor, state legislator, member of the House and U.S. Senate, that opening the door for others who follow me and not closing the door is incredibly important. And too often, we forget that we can actually be the catalyst for change, that we can be the portal for opportunity. If we keep that in mind, especially all of those who already have a degree of a leadership role in the society, I think we can unlock enormous potential. And then you have to take it to heart. You have to make it a personal commitment. And if you make it that personal commitment, then you can unlock opportunities. And in doing so, you will find yourself to be enriched, not only personally by the satisfaction of what has happened, but I have mentored individuals who have now become some of my biggest allies. And I'm sure you all could mentor individuals who would be some of your biggest clients.
Right. Well, Senator Menendez, thank you again so much for your words of wisdom and your leadership, as I mentioned, on this truly important issue, for sharing your stories and everything about your life story. So thank you again for joining us. And I think I speak on behalf of everyone here when I say thank you and show our appreciation for the work that you've done promoting diversity in corporate governance. So gracias.
Muchísimas gracias.
Up next, you'll hear from my friend Ricardo Ansaldúa, co-founder of the Alumni Society and former executive vice president and general counsel of Freddie Mac. He'll share his words of wisdom before we open up the floor to our surprise musical performance, followed by our final networking session of the day.